Jeff Lubbers.
Hello, I'm here.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Are there any ACUS members either on the Committee of Regulation or not on the committee whose name I did not call? All right, great. Seeing none, I'll turn it over to you, Helen. Thank you.
Did you want to turn it over to Andy?
Oh yeah, I'll turn it over to Andy. Andy, did you have any opening remarks? You're muted.
I'm sorry, you'd think by now I get the hang of that. Kaja, Helen, thank you for recognizing me. Hello, everyone. Welcome. Thank you for being at this meeting, and thank you for all the work you've been putting in, helping us with this project. I want to thank a few people, starting with Kaja for shepherding this project to this point. Thank you to our new chair, Helen, for agreeing to chair this committee. This is her first meeting, I think, of the committee and first project. So we're very grateful to her. Thank you to Erica Litzen, our researcher, writer, consultant on this project, for an excellent report. And I just want to quickly say that this is an important subject to millions of Americans, if not more. Very few of us will avoid some time in our life interacting with the federal administrative agencies that require a user fee for us to do something. And the public is entitled to know why those user fees exist, what they're being used for, how they're set, and all of the questions that Erica addresses in her report. So I look forward to the discussion and to the amendments we will consider today. Thanks, guys. Or back to Helen, excuse me.
No, thank you, Andy. Hi, everyone. Really excited to be here with you. As Andy said, this is my first meeting and first recommendation to work on with the committee as the chair. So I'm really excited to be here. So I also pre-apologize for any missteps I make because this is a little new to me. And I'm really excited to be here today. I don't know if you've seen the draft report. It is phenomenal. I think Erica did a terrific job on it. And so we're really excited to go and get your input on the draft recommendation. So I'm just going to quickly go over the protocols and then we will turn it over to Erica to give her presentation. So please note that only ACUS members, including government members, public members, senior fellows, liaison representatives, and special counsels, whether or not on the committee, and their designated alternates have full speaking privileges. To avoid background noise, though, please keep your microphone on mute and either use the raise hand feature or add a comment in the chat feature if you'd like to speak. I'll then call on you and you can then unmute yourself. And then please remute yourself when you're done. I'd also ask that ACUS members and their designated alternates use the webcam to help facilitate a nice, robust conversation. With respect to attendees other than the ACUS members and alternatives, participation requires unanimous consent of the committee members. Time permitting, I will consider calling on such attendees at appropriate points and will presume that committee members consent absent their raising an objection. If any such participant would like to speak, please so indicate in the chat feature or by using your Zoom hand feature and wait to speak until I call on you. You can then unmute yourself and please remute yourself when you are done speaking. There is a theme here. For all participants, please use the chat feature only to indicate that you'd like to speak or for committee members and their alternates to vote when asked. Please do not hold any sidebar conversations or put substantive comments in the chat feature. And only members of the Regulation Committee, including the government members and their designated alternates, public members, senior fellows, liaison representatives, and special counsels have a vote. Please do not vote unless you are a member of the committee. And if you do not know if you are, we have a list of committee members in case you do not know. So that sets the table for us. I will turn it over to Erica to give us a presentation on the report and the research underpinning it and the basis for the suggested recommendations. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much. I want to first of all thank the Administrative Conference for retaining me as the consultant on this project. I was pretty well versed in FDA user fees before I started, but I did not appreciate how prevalent they are, and I did not appreciate how much they vary. So it was a really fun and interesting project to work on. And I'm also grateful to everyone who has read the report, which I hope you found useful and hope you will continue to find useful. The first goal of this project was to describe how user fees are designed and implemented across a range of federal agencies, both from a substantive perspective, in other words, the actual choices that are made, and from a procedural perspective, meaning how the designing and implementing happens. And then the second goal was, if appropriate, to offer recommendations for user fee design and implementation. And as the introduction to my report explains, this turned out to be a pretty complicated undertaking for several reasons. To begin with, some user fee programs are designed almost entirely at the legislative level, while others are designed almost entirely at the agency level, and then the rest are somewhere in between. The project was also more fundamentally complicated by the fact that user fees vary so much across the federal government, and their basic design often turns on the particular agency's jurisdiction, its substantive mission, and then the statutory scheme under which it's operating. User fees assessed by the National Park Service, for instance, and user fees assessed by the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. Not the type of fee, well, they have almost nothing in common, I guess I would say. They don't, not the type of fee that they are assessing, not the broader design features, not the process they use to set the fee. They have almost nothing in common aside from the fact that they are user fees. And so for this project, defining the scope of the project, establishing what a user fee was for purposes of the report and the recommendation that I drafted, ended up being really critical. And what I settled on was defining a user fee as any fee that is assessed by an agency for a good or service that the agency provides to the party that's paying the fee, and any fee that is collected by an agency from an entity that the agency regulates. And that captures a lot of the newer user fees from the last few decades. I did limit myself to fees that are assessed by executive branch agencies. So completing this project entailed quite a few things, and I'm just going to describe kind of what we did. The first part was canvassing the literature, the legal and economic scholarship on user fees, which turns out to be surprisingly modest. It also entailed reading every published Court of Appeals case mentioning user fees, as well as most of the district court cases relating to user fees. There are a surprising number of these, and I was lucky to have one of our best law students who is on Zoom here and was, we forgot to mention when we did the roll, he's a public member of the public, Tom Langdon, and I was lucky to have him doing the groundwork on that review. And he and I also interviewed the staff at 7 agencies, as well as 2 private sector entities that have an interest in the user fees that are assessed by 2 other agencies. And we selected the agencies with a view to ensuring some diversity in the user fee design. So for instance, an agency that is mostly or entirely user fee funded, as well as an agency that has a program or 2 that are user fee funded, an agency that has a reserve fund, as well as an agency that doesn't, and so forth. We were talking to lawyers sometimes, we were talking to economists sometimes, and the topics were fairly wide ranging. They depended on the nature of the agency's user fee program, as well as the scope of the particular person's responsibilities. It also turned out that there is surprisingly no public list of user fees that are assessed by federal agencies. And so working with 2 other research assistants, I put together the list that appears at the appendix to the report. And that part of the project, of course, entailed a lot of primary research going through the budget appendix, of the US government, statutes, regulations, agency websites, and so forth. So that's what we did from April to September of this year. And then based on all of that research and these conversations, the report lays out a series of substantive design choices, as well as procedural choices that have to be made when someone is designing or implementing a user fee program, whether that person is doing so at the legislative level or doing so at the agency level. And then, as hoped, that research and then the analysis did point the way to a set of recommendations. The report casts the recommendations very, very broadly and then tries to suggest how they might be operationalized. But they broadly, they boil down to 4 basic ideas. The first one is, the project revealed the importance of involving interested parties in the design process and the importance of being transparent with them about the decisions being made at all stages that affect the user fees. And it indicated that in many cases, the interested parties include more than just the fee payers. The second recommendation, or set of recommendations, if you will, are that user fee program designers think carefully about the potential for a fee program, whether it's the structure of the program or the amounts of the fees, for the potential for a fee program to distort either agency decision-making or in some cases private behaviors, to distort them in ways that may not be socially desirable. And then related to that, is the third recommendation that planners take into account considerations other than economic efficiency, which was the traditional and historical justification for user fees, and considerations other than increasing the resources that are available to an agency to defray its cost, which is the other common justification that is used, to consider other factors when deciding whether to impose user fees or how to structure a user fee program. So for instance, it may be appropriate to consider fee reductions or waivers or exemptions to further values, other social values. Considerations of fairness and equity, for instance, may be important to take into account. And finally, the report recommends that some attention be paid to the risks inherent in an agency being heavily dependent on user fees. So I know it was a very long report for everyone to read, and I'm grateful to anyone who took the time to read the whole thing. I'm glad that it was useful to the administrative conference staff in drafting their recommendation, and I was delighted to read the draft, and I'm really looking forward to the discussion today. I just close by saying that I would urge anyone who has comments on the draft report to follow up with me, because I need to bring it into the end zone, of course, over the next few weeks, and I'm eager for feedback. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Erica, for that excellent overview. I hope everyone feels grounded for the discussion now. So I guess we will turn it over then, Kasia, to the text and any comments and edits people have suggested for it. And we're going to go to the first recommendation. So the first consideration, is this the first time everybody's seeing this? Did we email it out to people first? Okay.
It was sent out, yes.
Yes. Okay, so on the first consideration that program designers in Congress and executive branch identify the purpose of the agency's user fee program, was there any comments or edits suggested on this? Am I seeing any? If you would like to speak, any hands? If not, we can go to the second one then. It's a quiet group today. The second consideration is when establishing a user fee funded program, designers should address any feature of the program that might inadvertently affect agency decision-making or be perceived as creating a conflict of interest at the agency, especially in novel user fee structures and instances in which an agency collects user fees from entities that it regulates. Any edits, comments, concerns? Jeff.
Okay, I'll break the ice here.
Thank you.
I mean, I think this is sensible, except that the designers should address a feature that is perceived as creating a conflict of interest. They need to do more than address it. They need to make sure that that doesn't happen, right? And then any feature of the program that might inadvertently affect agency decision-making, I think it would be kind of hard. If it was inadvertent, they may not know about it when they're designing it. You know, I mean, if it appears later on that it somehow inadvertently affected agency decision-making, then it should be fixed. But there's sort of a temporal disconnect on that to me. I'm not trying to be overly critical, but I just think it's needs to be rethought a little bit.
Thank you for that. Erica, do you have thoughts on it?
Yeah, I wonder if maybe it makes more sense to say when reviewing a user fee funded program, because I think the point is good. And the report at least talks about the situation where over time concerns have been raised, perhaps even empirically substantiated, that the agency's decision-making has been skewed or that there's a conflict of interest that seems apparent. And so maybe the idea is when reviewing it, designers should address any feature of the program that I'm terrible at drafting on the fly here, but it might be something like that I don't know, might have been don't type it, don't type it while I'm talking. That might be that has about which concerns have been raised. I mean, that's sort of the idea, right? I mean, if I'm thinking of what happened with PTO, right? Somebody did some empirical research and suggested that there was a little bit of skewing of the substantive decisions. Any feature of the program that
has proven
yes, well, has proven. Yeah, and maybe it's two things. Maybe it is when establishing should consider whether any feature of the program might inadvertently affect or be perceived. Let's start with that, actually. So get rid of the review and make it when establishing, and make, rather than address that, say should consider whether or avoid any feature that, or however Jeff you want to, it's consider whether any feature might, or avoid any feature that would, mitigate any aspect that would. I don't know. I agree about the temporal disconnect.
Jeff, thoughts?
Should consider whether any feature at the beginning, the first line.
Yeah.
The first line should consider any feature of the program might inadvertently affect, or and then the second part would be that it should be reviewed once it's up and running to see whether any of those things have happened, I guess. But I don't have the language in mind. But should consider whether any feature of the program might at the top. Take out that in the next.
Take out the that.
Yeah.
Anyone else have any thoughts on that?
I have a thought on later on. I'm sorry, this is my first time attending. I'm
Oh,
filling
hi,
in for
Karen.
Ken. I'm not entirely sure if I'm a speaking member.
You are.
Okay, thank you. I have a question about the next sentence. For examples, agencies should consider whether employees whose salaries are supported by fees. We have direct and indirect support of salaries. And if you went into indirect, that would be pretty much everybody. Could we change supported to something that makes it a little more maybe directly supported or funded or something like that? Thank you.
Erica? So before we hit that one, let's make sure we've got the first sentence, and then I'm gonna park it for a second, Karen, and then we'll get back to that. Is everyone comfortable with the edits made in the first sentence?
I think it needs a
They're
little,
not complete.
few
Yeah.
more words at the end.
Yeah, okay. So we have establishing it and then reviewing the program to determine,
To ensure or to,
yeah, or ensure, to determine or ensure.
It seems to me that for the first sentence, when we say they should consider whether any feature would create these problems, I don't think that we want to go so far as to say, and therefore not have that feature. I mean, one of the things, at least at PTO, was they made a conscious decision to structure their program the way they did, despite those concerns. And there was a sort of conscious policy decision that was made with stakeholder input. So it may be just consider whether it might, and consider whether steps should be taken to eliminate or mitigate those risks. I think leave it open, the possibility, in other words, that nothing should be done or that it should be managed. Maybe sort of mitigate those risks, the risks, rather than saying conflicts, because you've got two different things. And then it might be a separate sentence to say, if we want to talk about reviewing the program afterwards, or if we just want to stop with the establishing.
Yeah, I was wondering if reviewing it becomes like another recommendation almost. Like a periodic review of your. Any thoughts?
Well, and that's paragraph 10. When we get to paragraph 10, it talks about review. So.
Yeah.
So maybe just stop with the establishing.
Okay. Jeff, how are you feeling about it now?
I think it meets my concerns. You could say effects rather than risks if you wanted to, I suppose, effects.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah, and then with number 10, I think that would satisfy the subsequent review.
Great. Excellent. So if we have that one resolved, we can turn to Karen's astute observation of indirect versus directly supporting people's paychecks with the fees. Erica, did your research, was it identified on one versus the other, or was there something you were looking to hit in this?
No, and of course, in some agencies, this is not possible at all, right? I mean, an agency that is fully user fee funded, it's all of the employees are funded, are supported by user fees, including everybody who's working on the user fees. So I think it has to stay as should consider whether, because whether they should be, because the answer may in fact for some agencies be, well, yes, they have to be. As far as directly or indirectly, again, I think it varies so much from agency to agency that I think directly is fine. The important thing I think that my research suggested is that it be left as consider whether they should be, rather than a recommendation that they not be.
How about if
that's just not going to be feasible.
How about if you said salaries and responsibilities or activities? That would kind of eliminate the support staff, or as you know, the general staff of the agency somewhat.
Mhm.
Karen, how do you feel about that? Not to put you on the spot, but
I have no problem with that. Thank you.
Support staff has responsibilities.
Right, they do, but
Not a big thing.
that directly though.
okay. Anyone else have any thoughts, issues, concerns with the language changes? If I'm ever supposed to call a vote, anybody let me know that. Otherwise, if my way of doing this works for you all, that's great too. So,
I
Then-
guess I'm not a real. I'm not sure of the problem that the sentence is trying to solve. And we have several bureaus that rely on user fees. Everybody in there is funded by user fees. And I don't know how else you would structure something like that. I mean, that's the decision that was made. We will use user fees to fund these bureaus, which, by the way, is great when there's a shutdown because they get going.
But are they all involved in forecasting, cost, budgeting, and fee setting?
Well, I guess I'm trying to figure out what that means. I'm not trying to be difficult.
no, okay,
I
Erica.
think the answer is yes. Because
Well, so
they're involved in drafting the rules. You know, we have to do all this by rulemaking. So they're involved in drafting the rules. They don't approve them because it's higher up in the department, but they draft the rules that will cause fees to either go up or get set to begin with.
Right. Well, I guess,
That's a job.
part of the answer.
Thanks, Erica. If you want,
Sure. I think part of the answer might be that at some agencies, the people who are working on the user fee scheme are in fact supported by the user fees, that's just unavoidable at some agencies. This was, though, raised as a concern in some of the literature and conversations that I had. And I do recall that at least one agency had said that the way they addressed what they perceived to be, I don't think the word conflict of interest was right, it was used, but one of the ways they sort of insulated the user fee program from and I'll say conflict of interest, although that wasn't the phrase they used. But this structural separation was important to them, and I think what was motivating this concern is the notion that if agency staff are, especially if an agency is or a program is fully funded, in deciding what, for example, capital improvements they want to invest in, they could be making choices in designing the program that will benefit them directly. And I think the idea was a separation of those functions would provide a little bit more of a check on perhaps overinflation of anticipated costs. That was one of the concerns that I remember hearing, concern that sort of cost estimates would be overinflated and by the people who would be then using those funds. Less of an incentive to control costs, for instance.
thanks, Erica. Jeremy?
It sounds like you're saying there's a sort of cost benefit in terms of all these structural choices. I mean, would it be helpful to say something like, for example, agencies should consider, Congress should consider whether directly supporting salaries and responsibilities through user fees would have some, I don't know, unreasonably negative effect on the agency decision making? I mean, you're making that kind of calculus, right? That in some cases, maybe not.
It's the specific people. I mean, I think that the concern that I heard was specific to the agency personnel who are involved in the activities that will actually result in how much money is being collected from user fees. In some agencies, it was important to them that the people who did that were not effectively controlling is the wrong word, but directly affecting their own salary, their resources that they had physically available to them personally. And maybe this doesn't need to be included as a recommendation. It certainly was something that was raised in a couple of the conversations that we had.
Yeah. Okay. No, thank you, Eric. I see Jeff, you have your hand up.
Yes, I'll take one more stab at it. Whether agencies should consider whether there is a way to avoid having employees whose salaries and responsibilities are directly supported by fees.
Be involved in?
Be involved, I guess be involved. It's a little awkward, but that's the point I was trying to make there.
Yeah.
Okay. Jonathan, does yours build off of this?
Yeah, well, thank you. Jonathan Weiner from Duke University. I just thought there was a different concern in at least the first sentence of number 2, which might be different from the issue in the second sentence about forecasting cost budgeting and fee setting. And that is the concern that the user fee could inadvertently affect agency decision-making. So for example, if employees or an office are funded by user fees that come from, say, granting permits or licenses, then the employees or the office could have an incentive to grant more permits or licenses in order to ensure a continued flow of user fees. And especially that might depend on whether the industry is very concentrated or other factors. But I thought the second sentence, when I read this number 2, I thought the second sentence does not fully address this issue of decision-making that's raised in number 2, in the first sentence of number 2. And I wondered if that Erica or others could say that's coming up later. I skimmed the rest of it. So that seemed to me important.
Right. You're exactly right, actually. I think it's I'm sorry, I should raise my hand, right? Even though I'm the consultant.
Erica,
okay,
yeah. I'm giving you dispensation. Your hand is raised.
Okay, I'm sorry. No, I think that's exactly right. It's about a different issue. The first sentence of number 2 that's exactly right. It is about the fees skewing the substantive decisions that are being made. The second sentence, so it shouldn't be a for example at all. The second sentence is about a different issue, which is about whether the process of fee setting and the inputs that go into fee setting, like setting the forecasting and doing the budget for the year, all of which for some agencies is going to dictate what the fees are, whether that process should involve people who are functionally separated from those who actually will benefit from the fees that are collected. So I think it's a completely different issue. That's exactly right.
So Erica, would you recommend either deleting it or making it his own recommendation?
Well, that's a good question. Of course, I didn't draft these. The ACUS staff did. But to me, it was just one example of a different point. I would not include it as an example or as a separate recommendation personally, but I don't know if Kaja and Jeremy, what they wanted.
If I propose to delete that sentence, does anyone object to that? If I see no objections to it, how about we delete that sentence? Excellent. Does that move us to the next recommendation? Unless there's anyone else who has anything for second, but I don't see any hands. For the third recommendation is agencies should also address the risk that user fees negatively affect the behavior of individuals and entities subject to user fees. Alice?
Learn how to do this quicker. So I had a question about just a factual question as to what this meant. Now, when we do a user fee, we're gonna do a Federal Register notice because everything goes in the CFR for our user fees. So, I mean, where would we address that? Would it be in the preamble to the Federal Register notice or somewhere on a web? How is a recommendation suggesting that agencies would address this? And also, and the second part of that is, how do we know what people are going to do as a result of our user fees?
Yeah. Erica, is your hand up?
Yeah, I do. I think that it should not be directed to agencies. This first part, as you know, it says general considerations. I would start it the same way as recommendations 1 and 2, because it's really talking to program designers, whether they are legislative or at an agency designing a user fee program from scratch. And I think the answer to the question is that it's not about addressing, it's considering, and it's about considering the risk. And I think the best way to explain this is then it is about the need to consider how the structure of the program or the amounts of the fees might affect private behavior, like use of the service in question. For instance, I mean, the classic example that I come back to in the report a couple times is the Coast Guard's, the statutory prohibition on the Coast Guard collecting a user fee for search and rescue. And the concern there is that a user fee is going to discourage people from calling search and rescue. And so that decision, the decision was taken to not impose a user fee in those situations, right? So that's the kind of thing, whether it's a positive effect, we're going to encourage use because we have structured this to have an exemption for certain situations, certain people, or the fee is going to discourage use, but those kinds of effects on private behavior. And I think that the recommendation is probably just considering the risk and whether it might. So it's something along the same lines as recommendation 2. It's the equivalent for private behavior that recommendation 2 is for agency decisions. Consider whether it might have an effect and whether to mitigate or not.
Thanks, Erica. Alice, did that answer your question?
So I assume that I guess address is the wrong verb then, right? You just consider, yeah, you change it to consider. Okay, yeah, I'm fine.
Okay, thank you. Jonathan, I see your hand up.
Yeah, yeah, thank you. As I read this, it seemed that this was the place to raise the question, although it could be that it's in a separate place, that it's not only the negative effects of the user fees on those subject to the user fees, but also the benefits to the public of the user fees. So for example, if a user fee discourages some activity, that could be potentially beneficial to the public, or it could result in an optimal level of the activity. And I'll just take 2 examples. One is the one that Erica, I think, just gave about the user fees for rescues, whether that's by the Coast Guard or perhaps the National Park Service has a different statute or different authority to charge fees for rescues. It's true that that could discourage calling the rescue, but it could also discourage taking risks, going unprepared into the wilderness or sailing in bad weather. And so in many countries, fees for rescue are intended to discourage risk-taking or unwise risk-taking. A second example is user fees for access to a public good. which might be, say, the airways, like selling electromagnetic broadcast spectrum, or the atmosphere, selling the government selling or auctioning permits, tradable permits for air pollution. Those could be considered user fees for the use of that resource. And the price of that user fee, while it could discourage the use of the resource, that's also produces a public benefit. And indeed, Don Elliott, our ACUS colleague, wrote an article just a few years ago about how the statute cited here, 31 USC 9701, the Independent Offices Appropriation Act, by authorizing any agency to issue charges or establish charges, Don Elliott argued that authorizes US EPA to impose user fees for emissions of greenhouse gases and perhaps other air pollutants, what other people call a carbon tax. And Don Elliott's article says we should not call it a carbon tax, we should call it a user fee, and it's already authorized. We don't need new legislation. I'm not agreeing or disagreeing with Don Elliott's article, but the whole point of his article is that these user fees could, by changing regulated actors' behavior, it could produce a public benefit. So, okay, so sorry for the long explanation, but that seems to me like a huge issue that needs to be included perhaps in number 3. So in addition to saying program designers should consider the risk that user fees negatively affect the behavior of individuals and entities subject to the user fees, but should also include considering as well as the potential public benefits of the user fee. So sorry for the long explanation for a short edit. Thanks.
No, thanks, Jonathan. Erica, what are your thoughts?
Is it possible that that's captured in the first recommendation, which talks about the possible purposes? Should identify the purposes, incentivizing or discouraging certain behavior. I wonder if the edit needs to, if Jonathan wants a different edit, wants to put something there instead.
May I reply?
Yes, Jonathan, thank you.
Yeah, sometimes in the ACUS meetings, we're asked to, raise our hand and be on the queue for every comment. So.
No, I appreciate that. I was reading the language and got lost in the language. So thank you.
Yeah. So I appreciate Erica's point that, number 1 says identify the purposes, which could include the public benefits. But I think that Congress and the executive branch identifying the public benefit is different from number 3 saying, number 3 sounds like more weigh the negative effects. It says consider the risk of the negative effect. Just seemed to me that the parallel consider the potential benefit needed to be included in a kind of a full benefit cost analysis of how to, not just what the purpose of the fee is, but for example, how high or low to set the fee. Number 1 says, identify the purpose. Maybe the purpose is, optimal and fair access to this service or to this resource. But number 3 is saying something, I thought, more about the benefit and cost analysis of the outcomes of what the fee is or where it's set. Maybe that needs a different paragraph.
Thanks, Jonathan. Erica?
Oh, I think that makes, I think that's fine. I understand the consider the risk of a negative effect and the yeah, I think it's fine. I don't disagree.
Thank you. Jonathan, is your hand still up? Oh, go ahead, Erica, sorry.
I do wonder if we're going to end up coming back to the first recommendation about identifying the purpose and what the goal is there of identifying it, but
okay.
We can leave that for now.
Okay, we'll park it for now. Okay, Jeff?
Yeah.
Oh, you're on mute, Jeff.
I was tinkering with this language. So program designers should also consider whether a user fee might have a negative or beneficial effect on the behavior of individuals and entities, etc.
Thank you. Erica? What do you think?
You don't think, you don't need the last part, to mitigate those effects anymore. Just period after fees.
And to be clear. And so is the idea that recommendation number 1 is to identify the intentional goals, and recommendation number 3 is for them to weigh the costs and benefits of inadvertent effects? Is that the idea, the distinction?
Oh, I didn't mean to cross out Jonathan's language about it.
Oh yeah, let's bring that back in. Thanks, Jeff.
Just put the period after user fees on the last line there. Yeah. That's the way I was.
No, this looks good. Anyone's thoughts or comments on this language? So it would now read, program designers should also consider whether a user fee may have a negative or beneficial effect on individuals and entities subject to user fees, as well as the potential public benefit of the user fees. Jonathan? I see your
Subject
hand.
Yeah,
to-
so
subject
that's fine with me, except then we should include in not only the potential public benefits, but also costs. So there are, because now it's saying there are negative or beneficial effects to individuals and benefits to the public, but in my view, it should be both for both.
Okay, that makes sense.
I'm not sure if we need the focus on the individuals, but I see it was if the original sentence was talking about affecting the behavior, negatively affecting the behavior of individuals and entities subject to the user fees, the people who have to pay the user fees. And I was just saying there's also the effect on everyone else.
Mhm.
Okay, so, but those effects could be benefits and costs at the same time, depending on.
Do we need to reinsert behavior? Did we lose that, or are you okay, Erica?
Oh,
And then
Yeah,
Jeff, I know you have.
I
I think it's fine.
meant to have behavior in there. Beneficial effect on the behavior of. And then I think you could take out user each at the very end, the last 2 mentions of the fees, because we know what, just say fees.
Mhm.
Subject. To a fee or to the fee. The fees, something like that, those
Mhm.
fees, okay.
Okay, I think this is a nice job capturing all the concerns. Does anyone else have any thoughts on the edits or concerns?
Is there a way of just using the word consequences for number 3, as opposed to going into effect, the positive and negative or negative consequences of the fees?
I'm not opposed to consequences. Erica, Jeff, John?
I think talking about the behavior is a sort of a separate point, though, because the examples that Erica gave had to do more with the behavior of the, not just general consequences, but behavioral consequences.
I think we'd keep in behavior, right? We just changed effect to consequence.
Well, effect is not in there anymore.
Yeah.
Right, negative. Oh, I see. Okay.
Does anyone feel more strongly about consequence or effect? Jeff?
I think Daniel was trying to generalize it a little more by just talking about consequences in general. And I don't think putting consequence in there helps. I mean, it's either we speak generally about consequences or we speak about the effect on behavior. I don't think we combine.
Yeah, I'm trying to streamline
Yeah.
the language here.
Oh,
It
I
could
see.
be general.
But
Well,
I would just resist it on the grounds that the example that Erica gave was talking about the behavior of individuals, you know, should we go out on these rough seas or that sort of thing? So I think it's a little more clear with the word behavior.
That's a good point. Erica?
Yeah, I think I'm inclined to stick with the effect on the behavior.
Okay.
Personally.
Dan?
yeah, I'm gonna have that's fine.
Yeah.
This was just an effort to try to streamline language, and I'm going to have to leave. But before leaving,
Mhm.
I did want to just add that it's very helpful to have such a comprehensive list of user fees for the Health and Human Services Department, with which I'm most familiar. I don't think the appendix right now lists a fee under the Affordable Care Act in which pharmaceutical companies have to pay CMS for listing branded prescription drugs under Part B and Part D.
Yep.
As well as there are other federal healthcare programs, but it's like several $1 billion. So it amounts to a lot of money. And, you know, in all the years that I was there, I don't remember the Inspector General's office doing very much work with user fees, but there was a report that was issued in the mid-2010s about the fact that the fees are actually by statute given to the Treasury Department. Then the Treasury Department in turn returns the money, doesn't return, but gives the money to CMS. And I think either our auditors or our evaluators noted that there was a lag in the dollars being transferred. It wasn't a huge sum, but being good auditors and evaluators, they said there might be an opportunity to collect interest off money that was delayed by the transfer. So I just note that in case there are instances here where it might be helpful to understand what actually happens on the government side with user fees. I think there's an assumption that it simply goes to the agency involved, but actually that's not necessarily the case.
Thank you for lifting that up, Dan. Erica, any thoughts on that? I thought your report kind of touched a little bit on the fact that it goes to Treasury and then back again, but.
Yeah, no, I did try to explain that the Treasury role when they're as much as I could. I did not do the ACA one, and that's actually a really good catch. So I will add that one in.
Excellent, thank you. Hi, Alice. I see your hands up.
Yeah, just to put a pin on what was said before, a lot of our fees do not go back to the agency. A lot of them consular fees go to the Treasury.
Yeah, no, thank you.
It's an outlier to come back to the agency.
Yep. Jeff?
Yeah, when I was at ACUS in '87, when we did the user fee report with Gillette and Hopkins, they did a big compendium of all the user fees, and I think they even got into how much money was collected and what the fees were, and it was a pretty big resource. Of course, it got out of date pretty quickly, but it was, I don't know if Jeremy, you found that. It should be somewhere in the archive of ACUS, and there may be some things in there that Erica might want to look at, just because those things still might be kicking around in 2023.
Yeah, thank you for that. Erica, Jeremy, any other thoughts or comments on the third recommendation? So if I see no hands and silence, let's move to the fourth. These are the ones that are the considerations for Congress. The first one has several parts to it, so we'll start with 4A, which is when Congress enacts a specific statute separate from independent offices, authorizing an agency to collect user fees, it should specify as applicable. And the first one is the manner for setting fee levels. And Congress should determine whether it is preferable to specify the amount of fee with or without adjustment for inflation, or a formula for calculating it, or alternatively, whether it is preferable to give agency the discretion to determine the appropriate fee to achieve a particular purpose or to recover some or all of the costs of providing a good or service administration of the program. Anyone have any thoughts or comments, edits? Hi, Alice.
Just a philosophical thing. Are we, is it ACUS's in the authorities or responsibilities to provide recommendations for Congress? Or is this okay because it's just considerations for them to think about?
That is a good question. I thought because it's just something for them to consider, it's okay, but I'm looking to our ACUS friends. Does anyone else have any, Jeremy or?
So our statute definitely empowers ACUS to issue recommendations to Congress as well as agencies, the President and Judicial Conference. You might have reasons as the committee to make different kinds of recommendations to Congress, but the statute certainly empowers ACUS to make recommendations to Congress.
Oh, thank you for
That's fine, thanks.
Thank you for validating what I thought was the truth. So, anyone have any proposed edits for A? If not, we will go to B, which is any circumstances in which the agency may or must not charge a fee, or conversely may or must waive or reduce the fee amount. Congress should determine whether it is preferable to collect the same fee for all users, e.g. for reasons of fairness or administrative efficiency, or alternatively, whether reducing or eliminating fees for certain users would promote equity, reduce barriers to market entry, incentivize desirable behavior, or produce some other socially beneficial outcome. I call this our DEIA provision, which I'm kind of excited about. Does anyone have any thoughts, comments, concerns, edits? If I don't see any hands. Great, then we'll go on to C. Any required minimum process for setting or modifying fees, either the notice and comment rulemaking process as set forth in 5 U.S.C. 553, or an alternative process, including requirements for public engagement. Any concerns? Edits? Well, you guys are going to make this a very efficient meeting. For D, any limitations on the manner in which the agency may collect fees? Okay. Any edits for that one? And we'll keep going. For E, any required process for enforcing the obligation to pay user fees and any penalties for failure to pay required fees.
On the previous one, how do they collect fees? I mean, do they use PayPal or what do they do? Venmo? I mean,
Alice, do you? Not to put you on the spot.
Well, it depends on what the fee's for. I mean, if I'm getting a passport, then I send I send a check in, or I do pay.gov or
Thank you.
or something like that. If I'm buying a defense license, I'm not sure exactly how they pay. Probably pay.gov. I guess that's a pretty common thing to use.
okay.
But I don't know.
I mean,
I don't know why you would limit that unless there's.
but maybe you don't want to limit it. Maybe you want to prescribe a preferred best way of doing it.
Yeah, I mean, they might want to prescribe a best way that's consistent with like cybersecurity ideas. you know, you don't want stuff that's anything that's open, that's gonna be possibly hacked.
Yeah.
Um, but I can't think of any other thing that they'd be thinking of.
And then Erica, I was gonna say, if you had any thoughts about what this like D means.
Yes, so I mean, with respect to collecting fees, I think one thing that's important to remember is the diversity of fees that are involved. The considerations when the U.S. Postal Service takes a $5 bill from you when you're standing in line at your local post office are different from the considerations maybe when nuclear reactors facilities are paying using ACH transfer to pay the NRC. And I think that ultimately the ways in which it's collected vary. There's a preference for electronic, especially for the larger fees from larger entities, but I think there are other considerations, especially when you're thinking about fees that are collected from individuals. There may be situations where accessibility issues need to be taken into account. The people who've read my report will recall also that there are some agencies that use a middleman. So for the fees that are collected from passengers entering into the United States, the airlines are the ones that collect the fees rather than the agency directly, and then the airlines remit. And that is statutory, and there are reasons for it. So I think that's what D is getting at, just that there may be considerations that need to be taken into account that are specific to the agency and fee.
Well, maybe the limitations is just not the only word there. Limitations or prescriptions or something. I don't, some. Or.
Yeah, I agree.
Okay, well, that might not be the best word, but makes the point.
Yeah, thanks, Jeff. Erica, any other thoughts of words we could be including there?
Well, I guess if this is for Congress, the idea is whether they want to specify. I mean, they may not, right? They may, as a statutory matter, leave it to the agency's decision, but I don't really have any wordsmithing that comes to mind here.
Okay, well,
I don't know if you want to ask Kaja.
yeah, Kaja, or there you are. No,
Oh, okay. Any?
or if people want to sit on this one and think about it a little bit, and we can come back down to it, see if we come up with any other words we want to think of there. I will park it and we can come back, because I get where we're going on it. I'm not quite sure that the precise answer yet myself. So we will mark to come back to that. Thank you. Thank you for highlighting that one. Any required process for enforcing the obligation to pay user fees and any penalties for failure to pay required fees? Anyone have any thoughts on that? Edits, comments? If not, we can go to F, which is the requirements for the management of collected fees. Congress should determine whether measures are needed to address the potential perception of bias and conflict of interest, or for other reasons. Such measures may include requiring the agency to deposit collected funds in the U.S. Treasury, or ensuring that personnel whose salaries are funded by user fees do not participate in preparing the agency's budget request or setting of fees.
The term bias could mean a lot of different things there. Program bias or
the only bias that the report talks about is the statistical bias that was found in the empirical examination of the PTO fees. I was very careful not to talk about bias in any other way. So I'm not really sure what this is meant to get at.
Yeah. Kasia, Jeremy, any other thoughts on what we were trying to get at here? Karen, is your hand related to the same comment? Okay, let's see if we can like hammer this one out real quick.
I think this had to do with similar considerations as number 2, as recommendation number 2. That was my recollection when we drafted this.
Oh, Kasia, so did you mean sort of distorting or skewing agency
Yes.
decision-making, biasing decision-making in that way?
Yes.
Okay, so that's what it meant. So bias is probably not the right word, but that was the general idea.
And why is it called requirements for the management of collected fees then? I'm not sure I understand what that means.
Kasia, correct me if I'm getting this wrong. I think this was drawn from the portion of the you know what? I'm not recalling, so I don't want to speak out of turn here. If it's not clear to me, it's probably not clear to the committee.
We can certainly change it.
So if this one was focused on the management, was this really about where it should be going, whether it's in treasury?
Yeah,
Most of them are deposited in treasury, or if they can have their own like, fund that they're able to put it in. Is that what we're trying to hit here?
Yes.
yeah, I think it was about putting structures in place so that, I don't know, to put it crassly, people who have a hand in using fees or designing fees don't have their hands in the cookie jar.
Yeah, like the fox isn't guarding the hen house, right?
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct.
Yeah. Okay.
Safeguarding of collected fees?
So if it's helpful, that I think I know where this came from. There's a bullet in my recommendations that talk about, it says if concerns about capture or conflict of interest are raised or statistical bias has been documented, lawmakers should consider measures that will ensure greater oversight and control over the relevant agency decision-making. And then I spun out possibilities like always requiring the fee to be placed in the US Treasury and appropriated back, or limiting the purposes to which the collected fees could be used. And I had a bunch of ideas, but that was I think what this is flowing from, that bullet in my report.
Well, we've already had problems with the language in the last part of this F, so we changed it earlier. So I don't think we can use that language here.
I agree.
Maybe it should just be something like where the fees are deposited, or where
Mhm.
that's
There doesn't seem to be a recommendation under this A through J on availability of the fees. So maybe that's what the title of this one should be: availability of collected fees. And it should be something like Congress should determine whether the fees should be placed in the US Treasury and appropriated and subject to an appropriation process, or instead available.
How about deposited rather than place?
Mhm.
Right, sorry, deposited in the US Treasury. And subject to an appropriation, or instead available to the agency without further legislative action or something like that.
And I saw, I knew this was going to get your hand up, Steph. So I want to wait.
Hi. Hi, yes, thanks so much. I was just going to say that, I wonder if it would be possible in the preamble to discuss the Miscellaneous Receipts Act, which does generally require that money received by the government is deposited into the Treasury. And, that's the default rule. And so Congress would need to make an active decision as to whether or not to change that. And then if they did, we'd want them to think about these factors as they structured a miscellaneous receipts exemption. And I mean, this might be a good AGIS project at some point. Like, there really isn't a good overview of miscellaneous receipts or exemptions, how many there are, and what happens to the money. And, it's just like a really understudied area that OMB, I think, doesn't even have great data on. But I think it would be helpful to discuss that statute and sort of the default rule, and then say, if you're not adopting the default, then you should consider these things.
It's really helpful.
Does Erica know where the money's going for these user fees?
I mean, unfortunately, the answer, I think, is it varies quite a bit.
But there are a lot of them that deviate from the default provision?
No, there are some that deviate and have dedicated separate accounts, but the default, I believe, is the majority, but I don't know, actually. And I don't know if it's the majority in terms of dollars as opposed to number of user fee programs. So no, I don't.
And then I guess the next question would be, in the ones that deviate from the default, why do they? And is there some set of reasons that make sense to do that?
That I can answer to some extent, which is sometimes it has to do with ensuring availability of the funds because there's a perception that for example, to have a reserve fund, allowing the agency to bypass the appropriations process. In some cases, I think the judgment has been made that that's preserves the stability of the supported program in a way that being vulnerable to the appropriations process does not. So that's at least part of the reason.
This is a pretty big topic.
Yeah. So balancing what both Jeff, you and Steph brought up, I guess let me see if I'm capturing correctly what we're trying to get in this recommendation then, is that if Congress decides to make an exception to the Miscellaneous Receipts Act, there's certain considerations we think they should take into place to help mitigate some of these negative consequences that can happen if you're creating a separate fund that the agency is able to just directly draw from without having to go through the U.S. Treasury and the annual appropriations process you would do through getting like your apportionment and everything from OMB. Is that what we're trying to capture?
That's part of it. But the other part of it is there might be situations where the agency needs to have the money available right away and not to have to contact the Treasury and tap the Treasury. I mean,
yep.
So there's two considerations here. The ones that call for the default that we have, and then the ones that call for the exceptions to the default. There are probably good reasons for both.
And perhaps the recommendation should be nothing more than considering the reasons and weighing the reasons to do either, and leave it at that.
That's probably the most we could say at this point, without the study that Steph wants done.
I do want that study. I do. I want it. But Yeah, I will say, I do think that the bias and conflict of interest point, like that hadn't really occurred to me before, and it's so interesting and I think a good one. So I would suggest, I'm not on the committee, but I would suggest keeping that little tidbit at least in there. And I don't know that we need to get into the specificity of the final sentence, but yeah, you do want to consider potential perception of bias and conflicts of interest. Although, sorry, Jeff, I know you don't like the word bias. We could just go with conflicts of interest.
Thank you, Steph. So what do you all think of taking that last sentence out? Because it's just an illustrative.
Yes,
We-
the
we
first
took
half
out-
of it's already captured anyway.
When we took it out before.
Yeah. If we have an issue with the word bias, do we have any other?
Well, and that's not a complete sentence anymore.
Yeah, we'll have to
So-
fix the sentence. Yeah.
So should we speak of the default in somewhere here, or that maybe just in the preamble, but if we sort of describe what the default is in the preamble, then
The default is going into the US Treasury. So
yeah,
that's the Miscellaneous Receipts Act.
or instead be made available to the agency. Is that the opposite of it, or is it instead, is there another way to say that? Instead be made, instead be, I don't know,
Made directly available.
or
Sorry. It's been a while since I've done
What-
appropriations law, so I'm looking for the other
Yeah, and
appropriations
there's so many-
stuff. Yeah.
And there's so many alternative ways to do this, right? I mean, the Miscellaneous Receipts Act, your default is they go to the US Treasury and it's probably going to be done in the annual appropriation process. But there are so many other things that are done in practice, like it's available until expended, and it's appropriated, but it's available to expend it, or it goes into a dedicated fund, but you're only allowed to use a certain amount of it. It goes into a dedicated fund and you can have it forever.
Yeah. Let's see. Steph, do you have some magic words for us?
Well, I was going to add that the funds can sometimes be passed through to third parties in the form of grants. And so available to the agency might be overly limiting. So I guess I would suggest that we leave this, like Congress should determine whether the fee should be deposited into the US Treasury. And then, maybe, or consider, not sure, you could just do a full stop there and say, if Congress considers other measures or other options, they should take into consideration the potential for conflicts of interest. Other alternatives, maybe.
or instead be made available for direct expenditure by the agency, something like that.
Yeah, I understand. I get to Erica's point, though, that there's so many different ways that could play out that I'm not sure it captures everything. It's a good idea, Jeff, but
But we need
Yeah.
some sort of opposite language there.
yeah.
Well, you could, if you just ended, should be deposited into the US Treasury, full stop. You could say if Congress considers other alternatives. And then I wouldn't do it here, but in the preamble, you could offer a couple of examples of what those alternatives might be. And then, if it does that, it should consider the potential for conflicts of interest or.
Yeah, you could. So if you do a full stop after annual appropriation, and then where you have if Congress considers, or you could say, or if Congress considers the other alternatives, and it presents that we have like two options that we're looking at here.
Yeah, I want to check the language on the MRA because I feel like it's into the treasury and then Congress gets to decide how to use it. So they could use it for an annual appropriation, but they could use it for a multi-year appropriation. So
That's true.
maybe subject to appropriation. And
I
Yeah.
think appropriation. Yeah. I wouldn't say annual. So
So this comes up, when there's a government shutdown sometimes. And so some agencies
does.
that have these fees can stay open for a couple weeks longer or whatever, because they can kind of draw on these fees. So
right.
we keep hearing about this in the shutdown. So it must be that it happens fairly often that the money is available to the agency to be expended. So if we're going to say other alternatives, we might need such as being available to the agency for needed expenditures or program expenditures or something like that. Directly available, immediately available, or I don't know, but we don't want to just tilt this way or the other.
So can I say something? Or,
Yes, please.
okay, so I mean, keeping in mind that the default is the Miscellaneous Receipts Act and deposit in the US Treasury and then appropriation, I think the other two primary approaches are authorizing the agency to put it into a fund that is earmarked for a particular purpose. And sometimes that is permanently appropriated, sometimes it's not. And then the other thing it can do is authorize the agency to retain the user fee, and it's considered a credit to its appropriation. And so I think what we might say is availability of collected fees, and ultimately I think it might be, maybe this goes to Steph's point about the default, which it should say something like Congress should consider whether there is a reason to depart from the Miscellaneous Receipts Act requirement that collected funds be deposited in the US Treasury. And if it considers alternatives, it should take into account reasons to authorize a different approach. And that gets to Jeff's point about availability of funds during a shutdown and so forth, and reasons not to consider the alternative approach, which would get to conflicts of interest and so forth. So in other words, Congress should consider whether to take a different approach and from the default, and if it does, it should consider the pros and cons. That's not the wordsmithing, but that's the approach that I think I would recommend for this.
Maybe we could think about this more in between this meeting and the next meeting and come up with some language. I like your approach.
That's a good suggestion, Jeff. Steph?
I also like the approach, and I think just having a couple of illustrative examples and here are upsides and downsides in the preamble would really help put some meat on those bones.
Great. No, thank you. All right, everyone, let's put our thinking caps on between this one and the next meeting. And then let's move, that's a nice way to be able to segue to G then. Any limitations on the uses for which the agency may expend collected fees? It's kind of straightforward. Does anyone have any questions or concerns or edits for it?
This is similar to the one we put a pin in up ahead. So rather than prescriptions, maybe instructions. Any limitations or instructions on both of those?
Okay, looking to see anyone have any issues with those? Good suggestion, Jeff. If I'm not hearing any objection to instructions, we'll move on then. So what's H? Any limitations on the period? Oh, maybe?
No, I just have a question about grammar.
Uh-huh.
Limitations or instructions on. Instructions on. Oh, never mind.
Mm.
Maybe that's okay. All right, forget it.
Yep. Thanks, Alice.
Less, more coffee.
Later in the day, we need more help with grammar always. So thank you. For H, any limitations on the period during which the agency may expend collected fees? Congress should determine whether, for reasons of revenue stability, collected fees should remain available to the agency until expended, or alternatively, whether for reasons for oversight, fees should be available for a limited period, e.g. specific multi-year or set until a set expiration date. Erica.
I think this one is wrapped up in F at this point. I think between the two meetings, we should be combining those two because that's sort of where we ended up with F.
It's a good suggestion. Anyone have any other thoughts on that?
Well, I think they're definitely related, whether they need to be combined into one recommendation is to be seen, I guess.
Fair enough.
Alice?
Just for consideration when we decide what to do with it. I didn't see the reason to put for reasons of revenue stability and for reasons of oversight in this. I mean, it can be done just on its own without telling them what the reasons are. That's it.
Yep. This is helpful. Thank you. All right. Any other thoughts on coming back to H after we figure out F to decide if we want to combine them together? I'm not seeing any hands. Okay. So let's see what we do with F and then see if it turns into a nice combination with H then. For I, any requirement that the agency periodically review its user fees and any required method for doing so, for example, comparing fee amounts with corresponding costs or recalculating fees based on new developments and information.
Like inflation?
I know. Steph?
Yeah, I would welcome an inflation example here. I think that's where my knowledge of the Miscellaneous Receipts Act comes from, the Inflation Adjusted Act. I would just, this is such a minor point, I apologize, but could we add a parentheses S after method? Because there might be methods.
Oh, that's a good point.
Sorry, Steph, it's a little hard for me to hear you. Can
Oh,
you just
after
say that?
method. So put method, put it in S there in parentheses. Yeah. What do you all think of using inflation as an example? It is in the it is in the write-up, so it would be consistent. Alice?
Well, I know that for civil monetary penalties, we use a kind of a cost of living index of some kind that OMB comes up with. So, and this isn't the same thing, but I mean, it could be made to do something similar. Congress wanted to do that. This was a congressional, the Civil Monetary Penalties Act that we have to raise the penalties every year.
Yeah.
This could be the same thing from Congress. They wanted to do that.
Yeah, I would add to that. The consideration could cut the other way, like if inflation is high and folks have less access to capital, maybe you want fees to be lower if there are equity issues or concerns. And so, you know, I don't know which way this cuts, but I do think inflation is something agencies, if they have the authority to adjust fees, or Congress, if they are requiring agencies to periodically look at their fees, should keep in mind and consider, you know, regardless of which direction it cuts.
Of course, there could be deflation, theoretically.
Okay, how would we insert fee amounts with corresponding costs? I don't think I want to add a such as there. We already have an EG. Okay, maybe mine is very bad. So, okay. We'll think about maybe in the preamble, there's something about, I just know like whether or not an agency can automatically include like, like inflation costs in it fees it's a pretty controversial thing. Like some agencies have it, some don't. And it's so Steph, I see your hands up.
No, never mind. Thank you.
All right, we will stop my idea that was going on a wild goose chase. Any other thoughts or comments for I? If not, Jay, whether the authority granted under the statute sunsets? Oh, Alice, did I miss you? Sorry, I went too fast.
No, this is for Jay.
Okay, for Jay, whether
yeah.
Yeah.
Hey, I'm on the ball, even without the coffee. Whether the authority granted under the statute should sunset. I think we captured a little bit better.
It's a good edit.
So if it already sunsets, then, well, yeah, I think they should consider whether it should sunset.
Nope, that's a good edit. No, thank you. Any other thoughts?
Yeah. I have one.
Erica?
Yeah, I really like that edit, but I wonder if in between the two meetings, we need to double check to make sure that we're consistent about that, because it seems to me that everything under 4 is really of that nature. In other words, whether rather than any requirement that it should be for all of these, whether there should be a requirement. So I think that's just an editorial correction, but I think that's exactly right. I think Alice's edit is important.
Great. And that's a good recommendation that we should for 4 look at. Thank you for catching that, Kasia.
Well, the opening language in 4, it should specify.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we could add something there that made that clear. But
however we do it, it should be consistent through.
Yeah, we can clean that up. We can work on that before the next meeting.
Yeah, and now that I'm thinking about it, that the should may not work, because if Congress is enacting the statute, should specify whether or not it sunsets, and not necessarily should sunset, because if it should sunset, they would have put it in the statute already, because we're talking about a statute that they already enacted. The way I read the preamble to this, maybe I'm reading it wrong.
Oh, okay. So if this is what the language says. So it's not what it's considering should be in the language. This is what the actual language says.
I think so.
Yeah.
Yeah. So maybe the should doesn't really work, or isn't really appropriate. I don't know.
No, you're right.
Maybe we can think about it.
No, I think you're right. Nice catch, everyone.
Yep.
Okay, any other thoughts on 4? Going once.
well, I have one.
Jeff, yep.
Just J is not parallel with all the other ones. I mean, because they all have sentence fragments. I mean, well,
Yeah.
they're all like headings in a way. And this one is, so this one should have something like sunset requirement, or it's just a matter of parallelism with the previous ones.
So maybe that could be a takeaway for the interim, is to try to achieve some parallelism.
Yeah.
Yep.
In formatting.
Started off with an A with just a short summary, and then kind of lost that as we went ahead.
Okay, that's a good suggestion. We can do that in the interim. Great, we're on to 5. We're doing fabulous, everyone. So number 5 is whenever Congress decides to create a new statutory user fee program, it should offer opportunities for stakeholders to participate and provide input, such as commissioning reports, holding a public meeting, and it should reach out to relevant agencies for technical assistance early in the legislative drafting process. Who has thoughts on this one?
I don't have any objection to it. It's a little bit like telling Congress how to do its business, and I don't know, a little bit more than we usually tell Congress. So, Jeremy, does that bother you?
So it doesn't bother me, mostly because it draws on a recommendation issued back in 2015, technical assistance by federal agencies in the legislative process, which recommends that Congress aim to reach out to agencies for technical assistance early in the legislative drafting process. So this language was mostly to provide consistency between those two recommendations. You all might decide differently, but in this case, no, it doesn't bother me.
Anyone else?
What about the first part about the stakeholders?
Or commissioning reports and holding public hearings?
That's the part that bothers me. I mean, they
Yeah.
did it anyway.
That goes a little beyond.
You owe us no debt. You owe us no deference on that. So I'll defer to you all.
I mean, I don't really mind it. I don't think Congress is going to be resentful of the fact that we're suggesting it, but it's just a little bit farther than ACUS usually goes. I mean, we don't tell Congress how to run itself. But
How about getting rid of the such as commissioning reports or holding a public hearing, which is really concretely about how it should do what it does.
that would help, I think.
And rather than offering opportunities to participate, maybe we want to say that I don't know, it should consider the perspectives of
stakeholder input.
stakeholders or something.
Stakeholder input.
How about reversing these two, putting the reach out to agencies first? And then
And seek stakeholder input. Steph, I see your head nodding, so I think you have something you want to say. So
I like stakeholder input. That's where I was going to go to. But, you know, if there are good examples of this, like where Congress did commission a report or hold a public hearing, maybe we could just lift that up. And then, no, they don't do it. That's why we're recommending it. Okay, never mind.
I mean, I think one place this comes up is with reauthorizations. For the agencies that have user fees that have to be reauthorized, there's frequently a lot of interested parties, including regulatory beneficiaries and so forth, who are involved in the reauthorization. And there may be hearings, as well as a lot of meetings.
Jeremy, I see your hand up.
Yeah, I mean, if this is me just putting my ACUS hat on when, Hill stakeholders come to me and say, well, what do you have in mind? What are we not doing, or what should we be doing better? I mean, if there are concrete things that we think Congress is doing well and should do more of, or things that, as Steph said, Congress is not doing and should consider doing, like if Erica, you identified best practices for Congress in considering stakeholder input, I think that'd be useful to mention. That said, if there's really nothing, this is fine too. But that's sort of where we were coming from in providing concrete examples.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I did not look at the legislative process for all the different statutory user fees that I'm aware of. I know of the process for FDA, just having been involved, but other agencies, I didn't look at the legislative histories.
So if we want to stay kind of within the bounds of the report, then we probably wouldn't include anything then.
Unless others in this call have had other experiences with their own agencies or programs that have worked out well.
Recently, I shouldn't editorialize right now. I'm sorry, I take that back. Anyone, any other thoughts, hands? I like these edits. I think it captures what you all were looking for.
Just a minor technical point. I think Jeff had suggested reach out to relevant agencies first and consider stakeholder input last.
Okay. I have no problem with that. Anyone?
That's just based on Jeremy's reasons.
This looks good. Any other comments or edits for number 5? If not, we'll move from telling Congress what to do to consideration for agencies. So number 6 is whenever an agency establishes a new user fee program, it should do so after notice and opportunity for public comment. When appropriate, agencies should provide additional opportunities for public participation, such as using an advisory committee, holding a public hearing, or holding a listening session. Opportunities for public participation should reflect the considerations addressed in recommendations 2018, 2021, and 2023, including the time and resources available to the agency to conduct such public participation opportunities. Erica.
I think we probably want to be clearer that this refers to establishing a user fee program under the IOAA, right? I mean, because otherwise, or if this is about establishing a user fee program under broad sort of go forth and design one instructions, because there are situations, of course, where Congress writes very detailed statutory language and then the agency implements. And I don't know if that's what's captured, that's meant to be captured by number 6, but in some of those situations, notice and comment rulemaking isn't called for. It wouldn't necessarily be a good idea.
Yeah, in those situations, they would invoke the good cause exemption and say, we don't have any discretion. We're just doing what Congress told us to do. And here's our rule. It mirrors the legislation.
Well, in some of those situations, there's no regulation.
Yeah, it's
there's
just
no rule at all.
Yeah, you can just direct implement. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um,
But it says when appropriate.
yeah.
I mean, maybe could you say something like whenever an agency exercises discretion in establishing a new user fee program?
Or designs? Would when an agency designs to, I don't know.
When an agency has discretion. Alice, no, you might have a solution here.
No, I don't have a solution. I just know that we never do a fee without going out with a rule. Even when Congress was told that they're never really that specific, as I understand. Maybe other agencies have different experiences, but they're never really specific. They'll just say we'll establish user fees or we'll whatever, and we have to come up with a user fee program. And 9 times out of 10, it's going to be by notice and comment. I've rarely seen one that's so specific that we have to use good cause. Maybe, and I say that I'm just one agency, so other agencies might have a different relationship with Congress. But even when they actually tell us with a lot of specificity that we need a fee, I can't imagine doing it without a rule, because it's going to have to go in our Code of Federal Regulations some kind of way. People are not going to look at the the U.S. Code or the U.S. public laws to see what the fees are. They're going to look at the CFR. So it's got to somehow get into the CFR, whether it's good cause or whether it's notice and comment. It's going to get in there with a rule.
So the problem is that it is really, really very agency specific. There are some agencies that have user fees where the US code has charge X amount for X thing. And then there are other agencies where the statute is so specific about the formula that all the agency does is once a year plug numbers into the formula and then post something on its website. And so I think this recommendation has to get to the situations where agencies are actually creating user fee programs and making some of those substantive decisions themselves. And in those situations, there's a public process that's either notice and comment or something even more enhanced, but not in those other situations.
So if we say exercising discretion, will that be clear to the public or the readers what we're getting at here?
I mean, one way to handle that would be to say it should follow the rulemaking provisions of section 553, because they would provide for exceptions where it's dictated precisely by the statute. That's one
So
way.
would it be your position that if the statute says, $500 for X, that the agency implementing that has used the good cause exception?
I think they would if they'd probably want to have a rule, like Alice says, but they probably wouldn't need to get public comment on the $500 because it would be dictated to them by the law. So they would just say it's unnecessary to have notice and comment under section 553.
But we would definitely do a rule.
You do a rule, but you wouldn't ask for public comment.
That'd probably be good cause.
Yeah, good
It's not
cause.
written in the CFR.
Yeah. But I'm a little more troubled by you said that under the IOAA agencies, and how much authority do they have to suddenly decide, let's have a user fee program on this? So this makes it seem like agencies can kind of willy-nilly create a new user fee program anytime they want. And we don't want to leave that impression if it's not true.
Well, so the IOAA doesn't require an agency to impose a user fee when it applies. OMB circulars say if the terms of it are met, in other words, if you agency provide benefits, goods or services in exchange to designate to specific beneficiaries, you should charge a user fee. And so I think, as far as I know, it's sort of OMB policy that they should if they can. But the statute doesn't require them to.
Jeff, I kind of like your idea of just saying, let's follow the APA.
Section 5 US Code 5.
What do other people think, Steph?
The APA rulemaking provision.
Yes. Steph?
Yeah, I like it as
consistent
well.
with the.
Yeah.
I did want to caveat 825 because it's an important caveat. It's only when the government is providing services or things of value, similar to what you would require in the private market. So it's not, you don't have to charge fees to everyone.
Right.
Yeah.
Because then you could take out all of the additional opportunities for public consultation. It could just be.
You can take out after notice and comment.
Yeah.
Take out.
Yep. Exactly.
So Kaja, I think we could reject the red line in 119 and the beginning of 120 as well.
As long as we're clear that this is about establishing the program and not, or is this meant to cover both establishing the program and fee setting? So for instance, if the agency resets the fees annually, or as in the case of some more often, Is that also captured by this? Because if it's meant to be captured, we should say, I think we should say so.
That is a good point. Looking to our Cassia or Jeremy, what were you hoping to capture here?
You could say establishes and implements.
You mean something like modifications, sort of annual modifications, that kind of thing?
Or sets fees when it establishes a new user fee program, or sets fees under an existing program, right?
Yep.
Yes, I have a question, and I raised this because in the civil penalties context, like one of the complaints the agencies had was having to publish a rule in the Federal Register with all the associated publication fees every year. And so instead we let them put a table into the Federal Register. I don't know, there was like a workaround for agency budgetary reasons. And I guess like, do we really, if they have a routine annual adjustment, do we really need them to do rulemaking? They could invoke good cause, I guess, in that case. Maybe just in the preamble, we would mention that this doesn't contemplate notice and comment rulemaking in every circumstance.
That's a good point. Erica, any thoughts?
I don't have thoughts, but Steph's comment made me think about the fact that not every agency puts its fees in the Federal Register in the first instance. And I don't know if that should be part of this. I had mentioned I had suggested some transparency, at least a website that listed all the agency's user fees, because many don't have it, but some of them don't put the fees in the Federal Register.
So they're not codified in the CFR either.
Right.
Mhm.
Many are not.
That
Well,
might be-
ACUS doesn't like that. ACUS doesn't like that, I'll say.
That's why I was sort of questioning the sort of, it's a rule and it's but good cause, because many of them are just on a website somewhere.
But even if you invoke the good cause exemption from notice and comment, you still have to put it in the CFR.
That's true. That's true. Okay, Alice, you've had your hand up, so I'm sorry.
Yeah, I just put it up. Sometimes it depends also on what the statute says that authorizes the user fees, because sometimes it says that you will put them in the Code of Federal Regulations. And the other part of this is anything that's on a website. This is what I tell people. Maybe I'm too harsh, but anything on a website really doesn't, as far as the notice to the public. And it should. I mean, they should update the Federal Register Act, but it really doesn't count unless it's actually rule in the Code of Federal Regulations. So at least that's the advice that I give to people. So we try not to put them on the website. There were some fees that were on our website that we're now migrating into the CFR. We have a rulemaking to that effect, because we figured that it shouldn't be on the website. It should be the CFR. And we don't know how it ended up on the website, but we don't believe in that at state. So that's all I have to say about
Oh, thank you for that. All right, so we've played with the language a little bit to say if you're setting a user fee program or setting the fees, we should do so consistent with 5 USC 553.
that. Steph has her.
Could we add? Could we just add unless Congress has specified otherwise?
Okay, let's put that in there. And Steph, I see your hands up.
Yeah, and I'm sorry I have to drop, but just on the question of whether they should go in the CFR, I would recommend that we check with NARA and our friends at the Office of the Federal Register to see and get their opinion before making a definitive determination. Nice to see you all.
Thank you. It's good to see you. That's a good recommendation. We'll put a note down for that. All right, we've got 30 minutes. We can do this. Any other for 6 before we move on to 7? If not, let's go on to number 7 then. When engaging with the public as part of rulemaking regarding user fees, agencies should clearly communicate to the public the purpose of its user fee program, which, for example, may include objectives to promote equity or economic efficiency.
I can see somebody saying, objecting to promoting equity these days, but I wouldn't object, but
Does it sound like ACUS is recommending that though? I mean, I wonder about the benefit of just saying, communicate the purpose of the user fee program.
Alice is shaking her head. Yeah.
So I was saying, because I don't know why you're gonna put user fees on to promote equity, because I mean, how, if I have to pay fees, I mean, being selfish, okay? I have to pay fees for somebody else to get equity. I mean, I would say just leave off that whole last part of the sentence.
To stop after a user fee program.
User fee program, right?
Anyone object to that? If not, any other thoughts or comments on number 7? I don't see any hands. Let's go to 8. Agencies should maintain an easily accessible page on their websites describing all of their user fee funded programs, identifying and explaining the fees, and providing links to supporting documentation such as the governing sections of the USC, CFR, and recent notices in the Federal Register.
So I have a thought on this. I know that Alice was saying that they are moving away from the website in favor of the CFR. And I guess I would want to defend the website because we have some other ACUS recommendations that talk about information being easily available on agency websites. And I do think there's a substantial component of the public that would rely on the website rather than the CFR, and especially because user fees are sometimes levied on individuals who don't have the same kind of sophistication as regulated entities. I think the website might still be appropriate.
Thank you, Erica. Alice?
Yeah, I don't have a problem with this. I think that the doing both is fine. And in fact, it's encouraged. We just don't do one. We just don't do stick to just the website and not do the APA part of it, because as of now, we can end up getting sued and we're going to lose, if it's just on a website where we're imposing fees or obligations or on somebody. And so, I agree that we should do this. I don't have a problem with number 8. The more information you give the public, the better. And I agree that more people are going to look at travel.state.gov than the CFR provisions that provide for passport fees. But that's not what the law is right now. So.
Okay.
I agree. I think it is good.
Thanks, Alice.
and you can link to the CFR on your website. So
yeah. Yeah. Thank you. Anyone have any other thoughts or comments on 8? If not, we can go to 9. Agencies should be transparent with the public regarding their user fee program, which can be accomplished through, among other things, identification of and engagement with stakeholders, public participation at early stages, such as during forecasting and the budget formulation process, and providing information on the agency's user fee program, budget proposals, and fee setting process.
when I read
think it should be user fee programs. I'm sorry, Jeff.
No, I'm not raising my hand anymore. I'm sorry. But when I read this the first time, I sort of stumbled over forecasting. What the heck's forecasting? Because I missed it in the first recommendation or something like that. So forecasting of what?
I guess it's two things. It's costs and utilization of the agency's services and so forth. I mean, that's a large part of this. If an agency is setting fees on an annual basis, is trying to forecast what is going to be the demand for the good or service in question, or how many applications do we anticipate getting? What are our expenses going to be? And are there factors that would increase them or decrease them each year? That the research suggested this is really for a lot of agencies where the rubber hits the road, and not being able to forecast accurately because of failure to engage with all of the people that might have information about what's going to affect these numbers can have real implications, I think.
I like adding that little phrase there, that helps. Cost and demand forecasting. Does that capture it?
I think so, yeah.
Okay, that's good.
Anyone else have any thoughts?
I'm just wondering about the order of this. So they should be transparent through public participation at early stages, but why wouldn't that come before? Well, 6 is establishing a new program, right? Okay. So 7 is engaging with the public as part of rulemaking. This seems to be before that. Number 9 seems to be before 7, doesn't it? Or am I reading this wrong?
Yeah, I think that's right.
So just
Yeah.
just in terms of order, it might make sense to put 9 before 7 and then,
That makes sense.
okay.
It is former 7, now 8, seems to be limited to when engaging with the public as part of rulemaking. But is that recommendation not more general? When engaging with the public regarding user fees, it should communicate the purpose of the program, period. Whether it's during the rulemaking or in general. And I think then it perhaps wraps into what is now 7.
Yeah, a lot of overlap here.
Yeah, now 7 and 8 are kind of.
I think they should be together though. I think you should move it as you had moved it, but we should think about whether they need to be combined.
And I think 7 actually as written is really not even necessary, because with engaging with the public as part of rulemaking regarding user fees, agencies should clearly communicate to the public the purpose of the user fee. But they're going to have to do that if they're in rulemaking.
Right.
So
Okay.
maybe just take as part of rulemaking out and maybe combine those two some kind of way.
Put it before 8, yeah. I think that works. I don't think you need to say regarding their user fee programs again there. You can take that out. Just should be no, not there.
No, in the second sentence,
Yeah.
it
Yeah,
should be transparent. Yeah.
with the public. Yeah.
Anyone else have any thoughts on this one? Very good. So Oh, Alice, is your hand up? No, you're just drinking, sorry. Then we have a new 9, well, a new 8 now, agencies we have there. And so then we get to our new 9, which is agencies to conduct regular reviews of their user fee programs to ensure the program is meeting its purpose and not resulting in adverse consequences, particularly those described in paragraphs 2 and 3. Anyone have any thoughts or comments?
I think it should be to ensure the programs. I think we need to, for grammatical purposes, it needs to be, and maybe rather than the not resulting in adverse consequences, we should say something about just sort of unintended consequences, period. Because they might be positive, they might be negative, and it might not be that we don't want them to result in, I mean, if they're positive unintended consequences, that might be okay. So to ensure the programs are meeting their purposes and that the funds are sufficient, that the fund estimates, part of the review, I think, is making sure that the fees are adequate and so forth, right? I mean, it's reviewing the program fees. And then for the I'm not being very articulate here.
What if it's we're identifying any unintended consequences?
Yeah.
Yeah. Because like you said, they can be positive or negative. So if we just know what those, Jonathan, I see your hands up.
Yeah, I think trying to find a more general language here is helpful. So it could be something like assessing their consequences or assessing performance. Including the consequences described in recommendation paragraphs 2 and 3.
And whose performance are we talking about?
Yeah, if you don't like performance, could just say assessing consequences.
Okay. And assessing consequences. Any thoughts, anyone?
Results. Because we got consequences twice.
Results of the program.
Yeah, I don't know.
Mm.
Maybe performance is better. Yeah.
How about those,
Andy, yep.
including those described in paragraphs 2 and 3, refers back to consequences. Maybe not.
I feel like we're close.
I don't like consequences of the programs. I think, what the agencies are interested in is the performance of the program. Is it doing what it's supposed to be doing, not necessarily, having effects way down the road, which are all consequences of the programs.
Yeah.
Maybe they should be worried about that, but I'm not sure that that's necessarily their primary concern.
I'm not sure what, maybe the question is what Kaja, they may have been thinking about consequences, right? I mean, it might be that there are two parts to this, that agencies should be regularly reviewing the programs to make sure that they actually perform as hoped and intended, but also perhaps to consider whether there have been other consequences that need to be assessed, including the ones that are described in paragraphs 2 and 3.
Okay, Kazi, I see your head moving.
Yeah, no, I like that. I like having it broken up like that. I think that would actually make it clearer. Just have it be 2 separate sentences in the same recommendation.
Okay. And Jonathan, I see your hands up.
Yeah, just you could cite here the ACUS recommendation on periodic review from, I think, 2021. I don't have the number in front of me, but this is the report that I wrote with Laurie Benier on periodic review of agency regulation. Talks all about regular reviews and assessing outcomes, consequences, performance, whatever. So
That's a good point. Should assess the performance of the outcomes, including the consequences, something like that. I like that. How's everyone think about that?
I think in the second sentence is meant to not be about the performance of the program, but is meant to be about the consequences, right?
Ah,
So,
okay.
right. I mean, the first sentence is to assess the performance of the
Oh,
program
okay.
to make sure it's meeting its purpose, the fees are adequate, and so forth. And then the second sentence is also looking at whether there are other looking at and assessing any other consequences from the program, including those that are
Good catch.
in 2 and 3.
The programs, and then would it be then like such as those described in paragraphs 2 and 3? Like we don't want to limit it to just.
Right.
Sit with that for a second. Does that address everyone's concerns? If so, I'm going to look to Cassia. Do we want to go to the preamble or do we want to adjourn early and go and wait until the next meeting to hit the preamble?
I think since we have 12 minutes left, it would probably be best to wait until the next meeting, but we can also just ask the committee what they think.
What would everybody like to do? Would you like to, it's been a long couple of hours, but I think it's been a very productive couple of hours. So thank you very much. So we have like 12 more minutes left, so we can do a little bit of the preamble, or would you like to adjourn and we'll pick up the preamble and doing the final cleanups on this on our next meeting, which will be the, oh, Halloween. Everybody gets to wear a costume from 2 to 4:30 p.m.
Well, we were talking
did
about
we
adding
adjourn?
some things to the preamble. I don't know
Mhm.
if Kasia was making notes of all the things that were supposed to be added, but maybe we should see what the next draft looks like.
Yeah, because that'll impact the preamble. It's a
I
good
think we're
point, Jeff.
pretty close on all the paragraphs.
I think that would be a good assessment. We can certainly work on that over the next week and send it out to everybody before the next meeting and incorporate all of the edits that were suggested.
Great. Well, and now I'm going to look over to Andy. Do you have any more final words before we wrap this up?
Just thank you and congratulations, Helen. Thank you, Erica, and thanks for all the good work on this. It looks good. Thank you.
Well, I have one thing I want to say, which is that I'm actually on the adjudication committee. where I can vote, but, and that's chaired by Nadine Mancini, who's a fantastic chair. And if I close my eyes, I could have thought that Helen was Nadine Mancini today. I don't know if Andy feels the same way, but she sounds almost the same, right? And
Yeah, and Nadine is a very skilled and experienced chair. So
so,
yeah, kudos, Helen.
Thank you, Jeff. I will take that. So
Okay.
thank you, everybody. I think this was a great session. I really feel good about where the language is. So thank you for all the great ideas and the attention on it.
Bye,
Excellent.
everyone. See you
Bye.
next time.
Thank you, everybody. See you October
Bye.
31st.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.